Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
Good morning, I'm Jeff Kellam. Welcome to this week's edition of Encounter. I'll be your host today. I'm the Parish Associate at the Union Presbyterian Church in Endicott, which we've mentioned before, celebrating its 200th birthday. We're meeting in a 110-year-old sanctuary, and like many historic churches, whether they are white clapboard churches out in the country or Gothic stone churches on a city block, these older buildings are not always as energy efficient as we would like them to be. You know, we're congregations who sing a hymn called For the Beauty of the Earth, and in order to keep the earth beautiful and vital, it's really past time for churches to start paying attention to their buildings, their sanctuaries, their fellowship halls, their Sunday school rooms, and to pay attention to how kind we are to the earth and our earth keeping in our own church environments. And what we say about church can certainly apply to your home as well. So there's something called the Green Sanctuary Program. And representing that program today are two folks from the Unitarian Universalist congregation of Binghamton, which is at 183 Riverside Drive in Binghamton. And I was telling you that I, as a kid, went to your church. David Cook and I think, had taken the bus to the Roberson, and we're coming down the bus route, and I saw that modern-looking church, and I thought, I'd really like to see what that looks like inside. Well, this modern-looking church is now 70 years old and probably is not as energy efficient as you would like it to be. Our guests are Wes Ernsberger and Gerri Wiley. Wes is the male and Gerri is the female. And welcome to the Encounter program.
Glad to be here.
Tell me about the Green Sanctuary movement. I didn't realize it was part of the Unitarian Universalist denomination.
Right. So nationally, there is the Unitarian Universalist Association, and the Green Sanctuary Program is one of the things that they are running. It was originally formed actually by another group that's national called the UU Mission, for Earth, and Ministry for Earth. And so they were instrumental in creating this program, and they put something together that I think is very well thought out.
Yeah.
And they sensed a need for it. This is back in the early 2000s. The environment was becoming more and more of an issue, and sustainability was on everybody's mind, and there's a lot of environmental problems even back then. So they put together this program. It really caught on, and so it was picked up by the Unitarian Universalist Association as one of their programs that they manage. And so this is something that's voluntarily available and offered to any of the member congregations throughout the country, including ours.
Right.
And it's been so popular that now about a third of all UU congregations throughout the country are accredited as green sanctuaries. Ah,
so there's an accreditation process where you go through certain steps in order to earn a certificate.
Exactly. It's actually pretty structured, and they have created a green sanctuary manual to sort of guide a congregation through this process. And the process starts with, as you might expect, sort of creating a baseline assessment of, well, where are we now in terms of our church building and how the congregationals, how they do things. And so that's great as a baseline. Then the program says, okay, that you do at least 12 different what they call projects, so that to sort of instill and get the congregation into the habit of doing environmentally oriented things.
So this is certainly about the building, but it's also about programming.
Exactly.
Everything from, I suppose, looking at your electric use of electricity to the use of styrofoam cups in the kitchen.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, the way they define the program, they set aside like four different focus areas, they call them. And one of them is sort of like what you were talking about, they call sustainable living. But there's three others. And one of them is called worship and celebration. So it's bringing environmental issues into some of the worship services on a regular basis.
Yeah.
There's another one called earth justice, which is very much like social justice, but involves, there's a lot of injustices associated with things like climate change.
Yeah.
And so that focuses on that. And then the fourth one is education. We call it environmental education. And so getting the word out, educating people, both in the congregation and out in the community about environmental issues.
Well, you can tick that one off right now.
Well, we're doing that
That's
one
right,
right now.
we're doing that right now, yeah. And Gerri, your focus is perhaps more broad than the local church, is that right?
It aligns very well.
Yeah.
You know, I was already involved as a public health nurse. I actually quit my public health job to fight fracking in 2012.
Yeah.
And I was encouraged to do so. There were a large group of people who were interested in keeping the shale gas industry out of New York. And so they were looking for local leadership. And so that's when it all began to be more than a full-time job, protecting what we love,
right,
which is our children, our grandchildren, our and all that sustains us, the air, the water, the soil. It became an education for all of us.
Yeah. When we talked earlier, as we were thinking about what we were going to do in this program, you mentioned that you retired, but you're very active now. And that's a wonderful learning for folks to think that you don't retire from something, you retire to something new. And
Exactly.
so you've retired to something new.
And it's a marvelous opportunity for those who, it's very freeing in that you don't really have to answer to anybody but what love creates, what we can create.
Yes.
To maximize our stay on this beautiful earth.
Right. When did you first become interested? I know you mentioned the fracking issue. Wes, when did you first become, I guess, aware or concerned about the environment and about earth keeping?
I guess it goes back a long way, but at the church, there was I was pulled into an effort to become more environmentally aware at the church. And a dear member of our congregation, Dick Rayberg, who has now passed away, led that effort. And he sort of sensed that, boy, we really need to get more focus on environmentalism at our church. And so back then, they had a thing called the Environmental Task Force, and I became aware of that and joined that. So did Gerri. And so that is what kind of led to, wait a minute, there's already this green sanctuary program that's out there.
Yeah, why reinvent the
don't
wheel?
we become part of that?
Yeah.
So yeah, but environmental things, I've had, you know, interest in that, but it's been kind of dormant most of my life, and it really started to take shape when I became more and more aware that climate change looks like it's going to be a really severe problem, and indeed it has.
Yeah.
So that's right around that time is when that kind of thinking began.
There are folks who talk about climate change as if it's something to believe in or not believe in, but science doesn't make it an issue of belief.
That's so true. Around 1995, the science was clear. The consensus, the scientific consensus was there.
Yeah.
But in these last, essentially almost 30 years now, it's been a matter of power and money that we're fighting, not the science. So a lot of money goes into fooling and creating front groups that convince governments and the public that there is a debate. There's truly a debate, and it's not solid science. So.
Yeah. We were in Norway recently, where they were touting the fact that there are more electric cars in Norway per capita than any other country on earth. But Norway also discovered that they have a great deal of oil to harvest, and so they are, as someone said rather cynically at dinner one night, it's wonderful that they're driving their electric cars, but they're poisoning the rest of the earth by bringing this oil up and then selling it to other countries. But that said, I have to say a lot about the way Europe's riding of bicycles. And
I was just thinking that.
Yeah. So let's go back to the church idea for a moment and say, where do you start? You know, let's say you've got, well, you're about to renovate your building. So are environmental issues going to be part of the renovation of this 70 or 75-year-old building?
Absolutely. Our church building actually was built in the 50s in a time when energy was really cheap and plentiful. And boy, that building really reflects that. Minimal insulation, and so that's a challenge for us. We even considered maybe we should abandon the building and start all over again. But we decided not to. So we're doing a major renovation, and part of it is to greatly improve the what we call the building envelope, in the amount of insulation and so forth. To the extent that one thing we're doing is the roof line is being raised to accommodate a lot of insulation above the current flat roof.
Wow.
So that's an example of it. Another major change that we're working towards is to, currently our building is heated using a natural gas furnace. And so we know because of climate change that everyone everywhere is going to have to get away from using fossil fuels for heating purposes. And so we want to set an example to the community, and the right solution for us would be, we think, a ground source heat pump system, sometimes called a geothermal system, because that's just powered by electricity. And electricity, once the electric grid is cleaned up and itself does not use fossil fuels to create the electricity, then that goes to a no carbon future, which we need to get to.
Yeah. This is something that your church has the budget to do, or you'll raise the money. But there are other churches that won't have those resources. What can they do short of putting in more insulation and redoing their heating system? What are some of the other ways that churches can make their sanctuaries, their educational buildings more energy efficient and keep in mind the stewardship of the environment?
Well, I think one thing that we are doing for the most part is, and did so more in the past, Wes was very good at making sure that nighttime and non-use times the thermostat was turned down.
Right.
So you want to say more about how that has helped and how that changed? Actually, we do have part of the building covered with air source heat pumps, so that changes the equation a little bit.
I remember in the early going, we had a energy audit done, and I think that things like that are available to residences and other churches.
At no cost.
At no cost. Yeah. This was done through NYSERDA. That's shifting as far as who provides these energy audits, but that's the great starting point, is because someone will come in professionally and write up a report and sort of give you recommendations as to things that you can do. And we went right down that list, and this was in 2010, and implemented as many of them as we could. And a lot of them are fairly inexpensive. For example, our church was heated with hot water, and so we insulated those pipes so that the heat was not wasted where it wasn't really needed. You know, we just go to where you really wanted to do the heating. So simple things like that, caulking, you know, getting rid of air infiltration issues. There's some things that are pretty easy and inexpensive, and good to do those first.
Yeah, the energy survey that you might do, it costs you nothing. The awareness is not expensive, but now when you discover some of the things you might do, depending on what your budget is, you could at least take a few steps, I would imagine.
Yes.
Whatever the size of your church.
That's exactly what we did.
And the insulation, as you were saying, the insulation is really the next step, because the best kilowatt is the one not used. So we want to reduce our load before sizing or even considering a heating system, because you want to minimize the expense of the heating system as well.
Sure. And every church would like to reduce its monthly utilities.
Yeah, exactly.
However they can do it. Our guests today are Wes Ernsberger and Gerri Wiley. They are from the Unitarian Universalist congregation in Binghamton at 183 Riverside Drive. And we're talking about environmental issues with local churches and other meeting spaces for people of faith. But also, a lot of this applies to our own homes as well. Now at our church, we realize we're using an awful lot of plastic, especially for dinners and so on. Styrofoam cups and that kind of thing. We're trying to make the transition now to paper but more reusable things too. Tell me about some of the practical things that churches can do in their programming.
We at the Unitarian Universalist congregation, we use our dinnerware, and we encourage those who rent rooms to do the same, to use our dinnerware instead of even paper. You know, plastic is the focus right now, but paper, the production of paper is very energy intense as well. So single-use anything. Right. Anything you have to throw away, you'd rather. It's got to go. And so we want renewable, not just in the heating, but renewable dinnerware. We often, wherever we go, we bring our own metal, like army-like plates. We bring our own plates, our utensils, and we encourage the same. I mean, I don't have it with me right now, but our water bottles, that's big. I mean, so many times at churches and elsewhere, they'll be giving an environmental talk and have their plastic water bottles sitting there. I always have to chuckle, but not really. Because the water bottle, number one, is made from fossil fuel that we need to decrease the use of, and more every day we're producing more plastic water bottles. So the reuse. And that plastic lasts forever. When you throw it in a landfill, it's just there forever. Basically, because we think it's being recycled, but the majority is not being recycled. And recycling takes energy. So not, prevention all the way. As a public health nurse, you want to, start where the problem starts, and not producing it and reusing it. The going back now to the education component. Now, let's review. I'm going to give you a test and see if you can do this twice. I was very impressed that you remember all 4 steps before. Let's do this again for folks who've joined us late. One is education. Right, environmental education. What are the other 3 components? Another one is worship and celebration, where we, in our worship services, integrate the, environmental issues there. Another one is earth justice, which we probably should talk a little bit more about. And the other one is sustainable living. Okay. So we've been talking a little bit maybe about the sustainability, and when you mentioned worship, there is a green Bible. Have you seen that? I have not. Well, sounds great. It's a green Bible where every reference to nature or creation is printed in green ink, so that it raises the level of awareness that this is a faith issue, that this is not a social issue or a political issue. It's a faith issue, because the scriptures say an awful lot about the beauty of creation and our role in it. Oh, absolutely. Back in 2014, the Unitarian Universalist Association's General Assembly passed a resolution on divestment from fossil fuels. So within 5 years, the plan to withdraw the carbon underground 200, they're called the top carbon companies, to divest from them and to reinvest in renewable energy. So more at that point in time, the church was very active, and boy, at this point in time where methane has spiked and inequality has spiked, they go together. At this point in time, the role of the church is crucial to making a difference and take that leadership role to draw down the methane and create a livable environment for our future.
Yeah. This is the justice issue that you were talking about, Wes?
Yes, and climate change is definitely an environmental or justice issue, because as we've heard again and again, you know, those least responsible for creating the problem are the first to suffer. Yeah. It's just very unfair. And if you think the ultimate unfairness is generations who have yet to be born, they have done absolutely, they aren't even here yet, and yet they're going to be, what kind of a world are we passing along to them? Yeah. So it's, the justice is important. And a big part of what we do with Green Sanctuary now is, beyond the sustainable living aspect, is we try to get involved kind of out there in the community with being part of rallies and protests, and try to really put pressure on our elected officials and our government to do the right thing. Yeah. And we were very involved, for example, back in the days where there was a big movement in New York State to ban fracking, and we worked very hard for several years, and by golly, it happened. So, you know, but it's sometimes things take time, but you just keep pushing, and eventually things start to go in a good direction. Yeah.
This is part of the prophetic role of the church, where people of faith are speaking out on behalf of others to make sure that there is balance in the fairness that with which we treat one another and we take care of one another. The community that we think of as our church communities, gathering in sanctuaries, that community goes beyond our generation to that of our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the unborn, the folks that we look down the road and say, well, gosh, what will the world be like for my great-grandchildren, you know, and theirs. So we live in the moment. We're people who have celebrated the temporary, but it's also important for us to look forward and see what we can do to keep the earth strong and vital for them. Yeah. So this is, you know, your church, and what do you do beyond your local congregation? I assume that you are involved in other organizations as well.
One thing that I spend quite a bit of time on is it's totally possible for everybody to be carbon neutral in their electricity. So monthly, I publish a newsletter which contains a chart of the subscription solar, community solar opportunities. There are various opportunities that I vet over the last 2 years, actually. And also an ESCO report, that's Energy Supply Company. So in other words, the church or individuals do not have to accept the utilities version of what they purchase for us, which is about 40% fossil fuels and 36% nuclear. If we don't like that, and there's good reason not to like that, we can go 100% renewable in our electricity. Granted, the electrons are still the same, but it's a huge pressure on the industry to make that tweak by everyone doing 100% renewable energy via ESCO and subscription community solar, and most people can do both.
Sure, yeah. Now, tell me about your newsletter. Is it available to anyone? And how would we get it?
Is it
online?
I will give it to you right now.
Okay. All right.
And the public can find it on, it's actually one of the organizations, Heat Smart Tompkins. You can either put heatsmarttompkins.org or solartompkins.org, and you'll find 2 tabs. One is resources, and the other is, I believe, community solar resources, resources tab, and you will find the monthly updates on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And so tell me those 2 addresses again.
Okay. www.solartompkins.org.
Okay.
Is one.
That's good.
Or Google heatsmart.org, and you'll find the resources.
Yeah.
You'll find it. It will switch over.
And the reference is to Tompkins County.
It is, but it's there are 15 actually Heat Smart programs now that serve New York State. So Solar Tompkins was the first, and that's why it is on there. But it applies to a much larger geographical area.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that resource. That's going to be helpful. And thank you both for joining me for this program about the Green Sanctuary program that is locally rooted at the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Binghamton, which is at 183 Riverside Drive. And our guests today have been Wes Ernsberger and Gerri Wiley, part of that congregation. And I appreciate your not only being here, but the work that you do in helping people understand that earth care is important for us and for our grandchildren and beyond future generations.
Our pleasure.
Our thanks to you for joining us for the Encounter program produced by the Brim County Council of Churches in association with WBNG TV. And our thanks too to the Town Square Media radio stations for carrying the audio portion of our program. I'm Jeff Kellam, hoping that you'll join us again next week when Joe and I will be here, for better or for worse. I can't wait to see what happens when the 2 of us are on the same set. But that will be our program for next week, and we encourage you to be with us. In the meantime, I hope that you will be gentle with people and with yourself.